Welcome to the show, Olive. I'm so excited to have you. So to start off, could you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Hi, Jasmine. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really pleased to be here. So my name is Olive Anna Oluwatunyi Olani Pekun Olusegun, but that's my full name. But most people just call me Olive, and I am a spoken word performing artist. I write and I perform poetry. So originally, I was born in Kenya. My whole family is Nigerian, and then we moved to South Africa in 2005. So that's just a cool fact about myself that I always like to share because I kind of have this kind of mixed heritage in terms of where I grew up and just the different cultures that I grew up in. So, yes, but I've grown up in South Africa most of my life, and I studied architecture at the University of Pretoria as well as the University of Johannesburg. And the University of Johannesburg is actually kind of where I started to get more into poetry and spoken word.
Wow, thank you so much for that. That is so awesome and so interesting. It's so awesome to know that you've got all of this culture behind you from different places, and I'm sure that that goes into what you do. I'm sure that that impacts your art. But before we get into that, I'd love to know more about where your love for poetry started. Is there a story? Was there a pivotal moment where you just developed your love for poetry?
Thank you so much for the lovely question. I think my answer to that is that I'm definitely constantly falling in love with poetry in different ways, in the different, poems, conversations with other poets that I find. So it's definitely something that I'm continuously falling in love with. And then in terms of, where it started, I think I would have to say that my love for poetry emerged from a love of literature. I think that's where it all started. When I was younger, I would always, experience the joy of storytelling from my mother. First of all, she would tell me stories, in the kitchen, over the counter, stories, folk tales, and different things. And I would read a lot of books that would immerse me in different universes and, different experiences of women. One of the pivotal books in my life was A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. And that book really just delved into a world that I was completely it was a world that was completely different from mine. And I just loved how literature could kind of open your eyes to different experiences, but in such an intimate way. And I think as I grew older and older, I got exposed to poetry at school. But I would definitely say that my love for poetry and spoken word emerged from hearing other South African artists, at open mics, just, speak about things that were just so deeply rooted in our context and our experiences that I just loved how poetry, in such a beautiful, nuanced way, could articulate emotions as well as experiences that made me as well as other people feel connected. So I would say that it's been evolving. It keeps on evolving in different ways, but it's definitely something that started from a young age and has just continued throughout my life.
That is such an incredible answer, and yeah, I'm actually blown away by what you've said. It's really profound and definitely something that I see in other artists. Just this continuous growth of love and even just skill in their art. I feel like you're always learning more, so that's really incredible. I'd love to know when the first time was that you tried your hand at poetry, and maybe what that experience was like for you.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's poems that I find even today that blow me away and just make me fall in love again. So, 100%. Yo, lol. I don't know if you're asking like my first hand at writing or my first hand at performing. So, I think I'll just answer both. So, in terms of writing, yo, man, I think like writing poetry. I remember there was one time in English class that I tried a poem and I gave it to my teacher, and she was like not really feeling it, but I was feeling it. And I just felt like, yeah, no, I want to try this thing. I think there's something about poetry in just in terms of being able to condense a lot of emotions and a lot of depth in such a short amount of words and time, that was like, whoa, this is really cool for me. So I think grade 10 English, and then from there, started doing my own thing with more free verses and stuff when it wasn't like in a kind of fixed environment of school. In terms of performing, I think it was like first year varsity or second year varsity. I went to a spoken sessions event in Pretoria. I went to an open mic and I was reading off my phone and I was so shy. I just went up there and I was like, guys, I read this poem. Do you want to hear it? I read off my phone. But people really liked it. And I think generally in the poetry community, especially when you go to an open mic, and you say it's your first time, like people will really cheer you on. So I think that was my first time, and just the encouragement and the support from like complete strangers was like, wow, not only do I like this writing thing, but I think I also like, the reception and the community and the support that you get when you're doing it. So that's really something that's also kept me in poetry. Like the community, I think, is phenomenal. Pretoria and Johannesburg, that's where I've been. And yeah, it's just wonderful that, my first time trying it out, I really got that encouragement. And I think that's what helped me to keep going. Even today, I still get encouragement. And that's what keeps me going.
Wow, that is such an incredible answer. I'm actually just taken aback by the ability to go up on a stage and share something so intimate. I think that takes an incredible amount of bravery. I've written poetry myself that's not gone past like 3 sets of eyes because it's such a terrifying thing. So honestly, it was so incredible seeing you and your peers just stand up on a stage and just share things that are so intimate and so beautifully written and that invoke so much feeling. So yeah, like absolute props to you for that. So I'd love to know, Olive, what was your experience like at Poetry Africa, and was this the first time that you partook in the Poetry Africa competitions?
Thank you. Yes, so I went to Poetry Africa last year. Last year I was just doing the Slam Jam finals, and then this year I was doing the Slam Jam finals as well as doing performances and like school outreaches. So I think the whole experience was really wonderful, for many, many reasons. One of them being just, as an artist, being taken care of really well at Poetry Africa is wonderful. Being able to engage with and see other performers, and then also the school outreaches was just something completely different for me that I've never done before, sharing poetry with school students. But it was wonderful because they really resonated with it. I have one poem about black girls and our hair, and, performing that for these young, black female students and them resonating with it, was one of the really impactful moments for me that I enjoyed about Poetry Africa. So all around, it was just a phenomenal experience.
You've spoken a little bit about how these people resonated with what you said. I would love if you could talk a little bit more about your topics and your subject matter. And for somebody who hasn't heard any of your poetry, could you maybe just let them know a little bit about how you choose your topics and what the main themes are in your poetry?
Thank you for the question. It's hard to explain, but I would definitely say that the topics and the poems choose me as opposed to me choosing them. I've never sat down and said, I'm going to write a poem about this topic or that topic, but rather something that's kind of intuitively kind of just flown from a position of just being in my context and the conversations that I have on a daily basis. So as a result of that, a lot of the poems that I write have to do with women's stories and women's experiences, particularly black women in certain cases, simply because I think these stories need to be told and it's important that they're told. And then, also a lot of the other topics that I deal with are socio-political issues in terms of the politics of South Africa, the politics of blackness, the politics of race. These are things that I think I engage with because they're just so critical in terms of how we look at the past, how we look at the present, and how we speculate about the future. So those are the kind of overarching themes of my work. But I do write about a lot of other things. Some of them are yet to be performed. So I have other topics, but for now, I think those are the main ones that will probably be be the ones that I continue with for my life, really, because they're just so part of who I am and where I've been and what I've experienced.
I absolutely love that. I think that experience makes the best writing, and I feel like you can express yourself so much better when it's from personal experience. I would love to know more about your journey and your development in poetry. Yeah, where, from where you started to where you are now, what did that look like for you? And did it include classes? I mean, you're an absolutely incredible poet, and watching you perform, there's so much feeling and passion in what you do. There's so much expression, not just from the words, but from your tone of voice, from your expression, just as a whole. So did that take some kind of special training? How did you sort of get to that place?
Thank you for the question. I have to say that I actually haven't had any formal training in terms of writing and performing. A lot of the growth and learnings have just come from observing and exposure, a lot of which came from Poetry Africa. I mean, last year when I attended Poetry Africa, I was really blown away because I was exposed to such a caliber of writing, such a caliber of performance, different ways of writing and performing that I hadn't been before. And that kind of opened up my world and just allowed me the understanding of different ways to write and different ways to perform. So my education in terms of writing has been incredibly informal, but I think I prefer it that way because it's allowed me to in many ways become my own teacher, which I like and has been a trend in different parts of my life. So yeah, for anybody who feels as though they want to be a writer, they want to be a poet or performer, formal training can significantly help. But coming from my experience, I've grown and learned so much just from conversations with friends in poetry and advice they've given me, just casually preparing for a show, things like that. So that's really how I've grown, being exposed to other writers. I can't emphasize how much of an impact that's had on me, because it really just broadens your frame of reference and broadens your understanding of ways of how to write and how to perform, and it changes everything, and it's improved my life significantly.
Wow, that's actually incredible, and it's so cool to know that you haven't had any of that formal training, especially after seeing you perform live. Um, there's a deeper appreciation on my end for what you do and how you perform, and how you invoke emotions. Um, so you mentioned picking up things from people and having conversations and all of this. Are there any poets that have influenced your style? Any that have maybe influenced your writing or even your performance style at all?
Thank you. So I think locally I would say Kayaletu Nguzulo, we've worked together, and I really appreciate the power with which he performs. The subject matter that he writes about was just also deeply contextual. Yeah, and just the intelligence and the nuance with which he writes. And then I think internationally I would say Warsan Shire. The poems that she writes just personally for me have been emotionally and intellectually impactful. I really feel the weight of her poems in terms of the personal things that she writes about, but also dealing with larger socio-political issues. So I think those would be the two people that I would say, especially even in recent times, that have impacted my work.
And without further ado, I promised you that Olive would be doing a performance, so here is that performance by Olive. I really hope that you enjoy. I am absolutely taken aback by this piece, and I hope that you are too.
Here I hold sin in my hands, proof that I am a woman, proof of the pain inflicted on me that I silently bear, proof that I labor, but not one, not two, not even three souls care or share my burdens. Here I sit alone, as is my nature, bearing the brunt of others' behavior. Here I sit, Woman, bleeder, child, conceiver, everyone's redeemer but my own. Here I sit and repeatedly postpone my care for yours. I rush, I open, I pull the string, I slip in quickly. They must not notice how long it's been. They must know I am clean. I am perfect. I am woman. Supporter of many, supported by few, I am woman. Bleeder, reader, child, conceiver, still dream believer, daydreamer, night creeper, his redeemer, demure demeanor. Always the believer, but never the believed. Always the retriever, but never the retrieved. Always the shoulder that supports, but not the head that cries. Always the one to answer the questions, but never allowed to question why. Why am I a woman in the sense that it is my burden? Why is my womanhood your stoop to lounge on, your convenience to always count on, my body you always rest on, my limits you always press on, my character in your rom-com? Why am I a woman in the sense that it is my burden? Bleeder, reader, child conceiver, everyone's redeemer, but never my own.
What an incredibly powerful poem. Olive, do you mind telling us a little bit more about this poem, and just maybe you can talk about the themes that are present here and just the meaning behind this poem?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share that poem and to briefly talk about it. So I wrote this poem before hearing about this phrase, but it just reminds me a lot of the Setswana idiom that says Mosadi o tswara thipa ka bogaleng, which roughly translates to a woman holds the knife on the sharp side of the blade. And this poem, for me, it is an embodiment of a lot of the challenges that women face and how they're significantly underappreciated and how they consistently are forced to work in silence. And there's these two lines in the poem that always deeply resonate with me. Always the believer, but never the believed. Always the retriever, but never the retrieved. And I think for me that it holds so much power in that it talks about how so much of the things that women do are always just underappreciated or always just seen as something that is not as important, and we are asked to suffer in silence. So that poem is it's the embodiment of that, and I think it's a conversation that we need to have a lot of the time in our context, because we live in a generation where still women have to experience a lot of things and are constantly forced to pretend as if those things are not as bad as they actually are. And this poem kind of calls for us to reflect on how we treat women, and how we need to change the way that we see women, the way that we treat women, the way that we appreciate the things that women do.
Thank you so much for this. And I think what you have done with this poem is you've kind of created or described an experience that so many women can resonate with, whether their lives look similar to each other or not. It's really such a powerful piece. So thank you so much for that. I'd love to know if you have a favorite poem that you have written and what that poem is about.
Thank you. I think it's so difficult for me to choose a favorite poem. Here I Hold Sin is one of my favorites. Yeah, it is one of my favorites. I like different poems for different reasons, but I think another one of my favorites would be The Republic of We Starve Here, just because that poem, it's so nuanced, it's very deep and emotive and painful, but also very tongue-in-cheek. It surmises so much of South Africa's history over the last 10, 20 plus years. So for me, that is a poem that's so deeply rooted in context, deeply rooted in zeitgeist, and I think that's why I resonate, but also really just enjoy it for its offering in terms of being almost like a time capsule. There are poems that one could almost say are timeless, but this is a very time-bound poem simply because it is so specific to things that only South Africans will understand that I'm talking about. And I think that's why I love it, just because it's almost like both a lamentation and a love letter to our country. So yeah, that's why I think it's one of my favorite.
I absolutely love that. And I love that a favorite of yours is something that is time-bound. Yeah, that is so awesome. So, do you have anything upcoming, or any place that people can find you if they want to see you perform, if they want to find your poetry? Yeah, where can they go to find more of you and what you do?
Yes, so if people want to find me, they can predominantly look at my Instagram page because that's where I post some poems, but then also if I'm making appearances, I'm going to be in Pretoria at Spoken Sessions on the 9th of November. But you can check that out on my Instagram page, which is olives underscore poetry. And poetry is spelled Poetree. So like a poet tree, like an olive tree. Yeah, so that's where you can find me.
So, I have two last questions for you. The first one is, earlier on you spoke about the importance that literature played in your journey as a poet. I'm going to ask you in a minute to give some advice to young poets. But before that, if you would, if you could recommend any piece of literature for young poets, young aspiring poets, or honestly just anybody who enjoys what you do, what would you recommend for them to read?
Thanks so much for the question. It's so difficult for me to choose one form of literature. The book that I read every day is my Bible, and I think that's nuanced in terms of the fact that it has poetry in it. For me, that's how I understand the world and how I understand myself. That's very subjective, obviously, but the other book that I would recommend is Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. That's such a brilliant book, and I enjoy reading it. I actually read it. I try or aim to read it on a regular basis, just because I resonate so much with it. But it does talk about a lot of issues that I think are important today, and is a form of literature that also references other forms of literature. So I would highly recommend it.
To round everything off, my last question for you is, what piece of advice you would give to a young aspiring poet, somebody who wants to be part of Poetry Africa one day, somebody who wants to write the kind of impactful poetry that you write? What advice do you have for that person?
Thank you for having me. The advice that I would give for young poets, is that firstly, I think, good writers are good readers. The more that you listen, read other people's work, the more it will almost just give you a larger frame of reference, and it will almost bring things out of you that you didn't know that were there. I know that my writing has significantly improved because of just, going on YouTube simply and, seeing other South African great poets. And then, I think Instagram is such a wonderful tool of our generation. There was a time in my life I didn't even know what Poetry Africa was, but because I was at UJ, and that was connected to a really strong poetry community. I found out about that, but also through Instagram. That's where you find out about slams. That's where you find out about people performing. So it's all about who you follow. So I would say you can start with following me, but also check out a lot of other poets and other organizations that will post shows or post opportunities. So improve your writing by continuously writing. You only get it better by writing, but then also read a lot, or listen a lot, and then be on the gram, or keep your ear to the ground in terms of opportunities so that you can put yourself out there. And yeah, confidence grows with time. It doesn't just happen. So give yourself that grace as you grow.
It has been such a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much again for being here, Olive. I really appreciate having this conversation with you. It has been so insightful and so incredible. I'm definitely a fan of your poetry and the way that you perform, and the things that you are doing. So I want to wish you all the best. Thank you for being on the show.
It's been incredible being on the show. I'm really grateful for such insightful questions, Jasmine. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the time and the space that you've created to engage creatives, because it's such a wonderful opportunity to be able to talk about my work and what drives me and my passions and how I got to this stage. Because everybody's got their own journey, and I'm so glad that, you approached me and wanted me to share mine. Hopefully it can inspire and encourage someone. And yeah, bless all of your future listeners, bless the future people that are going to be on the show. And yeah, thank you so much for this, and I'm looking forward to what the future holds.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Olive, and thank you so much for being on the show. I do think that everybody is leaving this with something, that they're just leaving with something, whether it's inspiration or just a new appreciation for poetry. I know I'm leaving with a newfound respect for what it is that you do and how you do it, and just how much goes into it. So thank you so much for being on the show.